This podcast is made possible in part by WKTV Community Media.
Welcome to the Be Nice podcast, where we will dive into conversations that help us recognize, understand, and take action when it comes to mental health and suicide prevention. I'm Christy, your host. The Be Nice action plan is simple. 4 steps. Notice, invite, challenge, empower. 4 steps that can change lives. Together, we'll share real-life stories, insights, and tools to break the stigma around mental health and inspire positive changes in our community. Remember, the number one reason people don't seek help and treatment is stigma. Open conversations about mental health, challenging myths, and talking about resources reduce stigma, making people more likely to seek help and treatment. Myth busting can be life-saving. And one myth here today, it starts right now with the conversation. Today's myth, men don't want to address their feelings, especially in the Black community. We're going to bust it out with our guest today, who is Dexter Clarke. Clarke with an E, I must say. Dexter Clarke was born and raised in Flint, Michigan, and has been employed at Gennessee Health System for over 40 years. He has worked in various positions that include unit instructor in a sheltered workshop, case manager for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities and mental illness, to his current position now as director of faith-based and community engagement initiatives in Gennessee County. He serves as a GHS liaison to community-based groups, schools, and local organizations. Welcome to the Be Nice podcast, Dexter. I have a feeling, and I was reading your bio, and I'm thinking, man, I think Dexter and I probably crossed paths somewhere, me being in this field also for 39 and a half years now. It's incredible the work that now we do to this day, and what we were potentially doing 40 years ago when stigma was different. And we may reflect on this a little bit because back 40 years ago, pretty much people that were struggling with anything that had to do with their brain, their mentality, were diagnosed with severe and persistent mental illness. And oftentimes their diagnosis was schizophrenia. And I don't know if you remember that way back when, Dexter. Reflect back a little bit with me and the challenging work that we were doing back then.
Yes, and I agree. Back then, that was that diagnosis, severe and persistent mental illness. And we were dealing with, what we just call, this schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. And, those were the main things that we were dealing with. But now, 40 years later, we're dealing not only with that, but co-occurring with, substance use and things. So that even makes, the treatment even more difficult, because now you're not only dealing with a mental illness diagnosis, but now you're also dealing with some type of SUD or substance use disorder as well.
You got it. And even back then, I'm going to say this, that's what we had. We had young kids, and we really had an influx of young men, I'm going to say, who were abusing substances and having that first time, that first psychotic episode. We're talking, this is back in the late 80s, was due to drugs and alcohol, especially, street drugs or even marijuana. So now with that knowledge base, right? So here we are, fast forwarding, and yet here I'm sitting reading this statistic, this myth rather, and I'm going to dive deep into that now. Men don't want to address their feelings, and this is a myth, we're saying, especially in the Black community. Weigh in on that.
Well, like you said, that is a myth, that men, not only just Black men, but men in general, that myth is that they don't want to address or deal with their feelings. We notice that even more so in the Black community, and I think a lot of that is because it's been depicted in movies and things. When you look at the movies, anything that have men of color, they're supposed to be very hard and, no emotions whatsoever. And that's how they get through things. That's how they deal with injustice and how they deal with, disappointment and things of that nature. And that is a myth. We are all humans, and we all, deal with our emotions, but we deal with it in a different way. Now, in the Black community, as Black men, we have to combat so many different things. The one thing is just dealing with the culture. And the black community and black culture, the acceptable way that a man should be is to be strong, not to show emotions, not to cry, but to get out there and do what he has to do. Now, by nature, men are protectors, all men, just like women are nurturers. But now those roles have gotten so blended. Now you have, homes where, there's not a male presence in many of the homes. And because of that, you're seeing this increase in violence, with young people, because there's not that role model of a man in there. And not only that, but a man that shows emotion, shows that it's okay to show that you're hurt and to show that, you're overwhelmed. But now they go out to the streets, and now, that image that's being portrayed is to be hard and to retaliate and not to be, excuse my term, not punked out, especially as black men. But that's not the case, because men do show emotions, black men do show emotions, but we're very careful where we do that and where we show that. And many times we have to have that safe space. And for many, that safe space is the barbershop. That safe space may be the church if you're involved in church. That safe space may be mentorship programs where you have other men that are mentoring and showing, how there is strength in showing your emotions, but at the same time, you can still stand up for what is right and to deal with injustices.
I love it. And I love that you went right down that road of barbershops, And it's been so interesting because we're on that same page right over here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We started a Care Beyond the Chair project. Mm-hmm. And I hope, Dexter, after this episode today, we're going to be able to get together and further our work along with you. But it is so interesting. I walked by a barbershop. It's by the Social Security office in Grand Rapids. So every year I got to go in to renew my plates, whatever. And I pass a barbershop. And it's like kumbaya happening in this barbershop. It's full of men all taking up these chairs. And I just laugh. They're not all getting their hair cut.
Right.
But it looks to me like there's just a great conversation going. When did you discover that? When did you start with this work in Gennessee County with barbers?
Well, we just recently, over probably the past year, realized, because we were dealing with the same challenges probably that you're dealing with and the country, how do we address, men's health, especially in communities of color? And, we've tried so many things, but then to say, there's the elephant in the room. You have a vehicle, you have an environment where the men are there and where they feel safe, and that's the barbershop. And as you said, there's some men that don't even have hair that go to the barbershop, because that is a place where they can talk and they can be honest and express their feelings. And you have everybody from every walk. You have those that have degrees and, law degrees or whatever, those that are in law enforcement. You have those that are in activities that are not considered legal. But when they come to that place, the barbershop, it is a safe space and everybody is equal. And the thing that is so neat about it is that the barber is the facilitator. Absolutely. He's basically the therapist or the facilitator, because he guides and he sets the tone in that barbershop. And when you go to a barbershop that is, very well together and stuff, they don't tolerate, the disrespect. There's no profanity because, you have kids there too. There's no, dealing with drugs or anything in there. Because like you say, you have law enforcement, you may have, people that deal drugs that are all coming there together, but it is a safe space. So, we realized that, and just starting this year, in fact, this coming Monday, we're having our first initiative where we're having, mental health and also just basic health at a barbershop on June 1st in the evening. And this is going to be our first event, and we're going to continue with that because we realize that this is a safe place, for men of color to come and talk and to be vulnerable.
I love it. I know that at the foundation, we're going to want to share that out. So we will do that from our end on our Facebook, because you never know if we might hit home with someone over in Gennessee County. So we'd love to share that information. So are you training barbers? Are you trying to gather that momentum amongst many barbers to spread this message?
Well, as I said, we just started. So we have met with a few barbers that we know are well known and have a good reputation, because that's so important too. You want to go a place that is established and that has a good reputation because, again, you want to put your best foot forward. So we've had some pre-meetings with them. We've talked to them. We've explained to them, the concept, and they embraced it wholeheartedly. In fact, this barber that we're going to now, not only is he a barber, but he's a pastor. So, we're dealing with that too, because that's another place that we are trying to make inroads is into the church, the faith-based communities too, to educate on mental health. Because like you say, the myth is, even we talk about myths, that in the church, if you pray about it and if you have faith in God, then you're going to be healed of mental illness, you're going to be healed of broken relationships. But it takes more than that. Not saying that, prayer doesn't work, it does. But sometimes you need medication. Sometimes you need professional therapy to help you deal with the brokenness and the cycle that you've been dealing with. Because once you start opening up, and being transparent, you may find out that this is a cycle, a generational thing that you're dealing with of, dysfunction in the family, anger in the family, not being able to appropriately express your emotions as a man.
Yeah, and you did go down that faith road right now. And me personally, love when we do Be Nice Faith, because I think that no one showed more noticing in individuals that were hopeless, people that were struggling. In the Bible, it always is reflected back that Christ went out of his way to pick that person up and be an example to other people, especially the apostles, right? Of how you can notice this. And the next step in that Be Nice action plan is to invite. And you invite yourself into that person's life with compassion, right? And so I love that you're going down that faith road, because also in our faith communities, oftentimes people do turn in, but what their backs, other people's backs are to them, not welcoming them in for maybe the struggles that they're going through that have brought about this mental health challenge, right? Someone who has lost their job, they're seeking employment, they can't afford their rent because they don't have a job, their car breaks down, they don't have transportation. Instead of looking at that person that they can go out and find these resources in our faith communities, we are that resource. We're that resource to give that person that hope, that lift up. So how are you going to be addressing this in that environment now? What's your goal? What's your mission? How are you going to be doing that?
Well, basically, the most important thing is to educate people. There's a myth about mental illness. There's a myth about, health, and especially in the communities of color. And that myth is that if you have mental illness, it means that you're weak, or, that you did something wrong. And that's not the case, because many times, there could be a biological, component, it may go run in the family, just like, mood disorders and things of that nature, chemical imbalances. And it has nothing to do with you being weak or anything, but it's just the way that we're made, just like people that are, predisposed to diabetes and high blood pressure and things. Once you are educated on what those symptoms are, the next thing would be to educate how do you treat it. You don't ignore it. So, one of the things that we will do is to educate people on mental health. We even have what we call Mental Health 101.
Nice.
And that's for anybody, where you're educated to know the signs and symptoms. And we are educating even the faith-based community to say, when you see somebody coming into the church and they're showing certain symptoms and certain signs, it may not be, under the influence of alcohol, but it may be that they may be dealing with a mental illness. If not a mental illness, it may also be mental trauma, which is a difference. Because, a lot of times when we see a lot of things about these active shooters, they're quick to say that, this person suffers from mental illness. We find out that it's very few of the active shooters that are, mentally ill, have a mental illness diagnosis, but they may be suffering from mental trauma, which is totally different. And that may be circumstances, like you said, losing a job, losing a loved one, losing your house, your car not running. That can cause a lot of stress, and it will mimic signs that may seem like mental illness, just irrational and impulsive behaviors and things. And basically what it is that you're just dealing with trying to deal with, that pressure that you're dealing with, and not having anyone to guide and direct you, and being able to process and to manage your stress, can lead to, those outbursts like active shootings. It can lead to stress in the family and dysfunction and things like that.
Absolutely. And we need champions on the ground that are ultimately going to challenge that stigma and, most of all, provide these resources that are available. And in our community, I'm Greek Orthodox, right? And we're doing a lot of this work amongst our community, and especially to our priests and lay and assistant priests, that once this person needs that help, it's like helping them to get to those resources, meaning good counselors in our communities. And I believe also that probably in your community, you're working on finding these clinicians that are going to be available. So once you get this education out, one thing I know is we have a shortage of clinicians of color. Do you know what's happening in that way to boost that number?
Well, I think, and you're correct, people need to see people like them that's providing the services, because that brings some comfort. It does. What the challenge is, getting people, once again, there's a stigma, because when you look at mental health, most of those people that are in mental health, social workers and stuff, are usually females.
Yes.
You don't see many men that, go in that field. Used to be the same thing for nurses. Now you're seeing more male nurses in the field of nursing. So the challenge is getting, men, again, to be involved with that and to look at that as an avenue, because I think still there's a stigma that, once again, being in mental health, mental illness, that is, not really a job, for a man, not really a job for a man of color. More jobs are, like in business or, automotive or mechanics and things. But we do need those, just like we need, nurses, male nurses at the same time. So I'm thinking, again, to educate and show the need. There's also a shortage in physicians now. We're seeing that a lot of people are not going into medicine. And a lot of times that is, from what I'm reading, just the challenge of being able to practice medicine the correct way, not being held hostage by policies, insurance companies that say, even though you're saying this is what they need, as an insurance company, we're only paying for this, And we see those challenges even in mental health.
Yeah.
There's certain, guidelines that you have to stay between. And you brought up a good point. 40 years ago, all we dealt with as a behavioral health agency was severely and persistently mentally ill. If they fell in between that, if they were moderate or mild, then we would refer them out to other agencies that probably weren't adequate enough, many of them, to deal with those that were falling in the cracks. Now our agency is not only dealing with severely and persistently mentally ill, but we're dealing with the mild, the moderate, everyone, because we know that mental health issues affects everyone, different levels, but they still affect all people. And our job is to, bring healing. And I think you brought up a good point, directing them to the resources that are needed. And I want to say that years ago, before we had Social Security and Behavioral Health Agency, it was the church. Yes. It was the pastor that provided, the services. And the church came together and they supported people that were unemployed. They supported people that were going through family issues. And we got away from that and became dependent on, social agencies and the government. Now that we're seeing cuts, and those things, now it falls back on organizations like yours and also faith-based organizations to kind of pick up the mantle and start providing those resources again.
Yeah, and it is. And I think sometimes people don't know where to go get help. And that's why a greater conversation, knowing if somebody is uninsured, where are they going to go get help, right? Mm-hmm. Where are there really good clinicians? Where are there people like people? And so those are clubs and organizations, right? And people that we know that are out there that also could be a mentor, where we might know someone, this person also had some struggles. And you know what? They've been seeing a counselor. Maybe you want to work with that person, which I love peer-to-peer is even good for adults and not just kids, the way we talk about it. What's happening in your area for mental health suicide prevention amongst kids of color at our schools?
Okay. Well, one of the things, and I just want to let you know, as because we talked about earlier that, at one time we could only provide, those billable services for severely and persistently mentally ill. Several years ago, Genesee Health System presented to the residents a millage proposal, saying that, we want to be able to provide outside of the Medicaid and Medicare guidelines for where we see the service needs are. They approved that. So now we have funding to stretch out. And those areas that we're identifying with are dealing with law enforcement, training them also to know that sometimes when you go on a call, it's not due to someone just having criminal behavior, but it could be due to a mental health issue or crisis, mental trauma. So training officers to be able to deal with that, crisis intervention, team training. Also, suicide prevention was one of the 7 areas that we wanted to focus on with those millage dollars. And we are going out into the schools. We have what we call a Hope Squad, that they go into the schools and they train the students to be a part of that and to be able to identify when you're seeing your peer, your classmates showing signs, when they appear depressed, certain things to do to encourage them and guide them to, needed services. Our agency, we're providing those services. Also, we have a 24/7 behavioral health urgent care unit that's available 24/7. You can walk in anytime and to get assessed and get, those needs addressed. We are doing, when you talk about suicide prevention, we have a curriculum called Soul Shop. And what that was it initially started with in the Black community, the Black churches, because we saw, again, talking about stigma, churches and Black communities don't like to talk about mental health or mental illness issues. But this Soul Shop curriculum does training on, suicide prevention, suicide education. So now we've done that for a few years, and now we're expanding not only for the communities of colors, the Black communities, but we're providing it for all churches, to educate them on, finding that there is a balance. Yes, we pray, we fast and do that, but also there's also therapy that could be used and also medication to help with those areas.
Absolutely. And I love that. All in all, we addressed our myth. And that is that men do want to address their feelings, especially in the Black community, and that this can happen through local barbershops, churches, and where they work. Everybody needs to be on board in this big conversation. I've certainly been educated much more with your help today, Dexter, and I love everything that's happening over in Gennessee County. I was on a committee years ago with a great woman from Gennessee County, and it was the Anti-Stigma Task Force. And we would plug along and create ways, and I think right now what's happening is you've busted down doors, and you're saving lives every day. So I thank you so much, Dexter, for being a guest today on the Be Nice podcast. I hope that our paths are going to continually cross throughout this great state of Michigan as we keep the good work up. And I hope that I'm still reading about you 10 years from now and 10 years about me at our 50 years of working in this system, because it's a hard place to leave when you know there's so much work to get done. So Thank you for all you do. I want to thank everyone for listening to today's episode of the Be Nice podcast. I definitely really feel we busted a myth today, and I'm hoping that you're going to go out, spread awareness. I encourage people to learn that Be Nice action plan: notice, invite, challenge, and empower. And most of all, stay tuned for more podcasts. Follow us on Facebook. Go over to the Gennessee County Community Mental Health site and follow Dexter and the great work that they're doing. And on behalf of everybody here, I want to send out a special note to you all just to keep on going and be nice.
This podcast is made possible in part by WKTV Community Media.